We are continuing this morning in this series, Faith in Stress. And I hope that some of these messages have been encouraging to you, especially if you have encountered stress in the last couple of weeks. Or if you have somehow managed to make it without stress, good on you. But I somehow feel like you're not being honest with us. When I was in high school, there was a required English course. It was Drama 1, and in Drama 1 we read a whole bunch of plays. This was the class for me where you read Romeo and Juliet, you read Much Ado About Nothing, you read some of those kinds of plays. This is fascinating to me now, looking back. We read a play, and it was called God's Favorite. And God's Favorite is loosely based on the book of Job. But I had no idea that it was loosely based on the book of Job, and I had no idea what the book of Job was. And I can't escape the irony. I can't escape this, because at that point in my life, I would have told you I was an atheist. I would have told you I don't believe in God, and I don't believe in the Bible, and I don't believe in any of this stuff. And one of the reasons, now you've got to listen to sophomore or junior year Aussie, okay? I did not have the vocabulary and I did not have the way to say this. But one of the reasons that I was an atheist at that point is what's called the problem of evil. Looking around the world and just seeing how many people suffer for seemingly no good reason. And so as a teenager, I concluded that suffering is so great, there can't be a God. And we read that play, and the irony is that Job touches the very heart of that very issue. And it deals with that very issue in a very complex and complicated and yet meaningful way. Job invites a whole bunch of scholarly debate, most of which we're not going to settle this morning. It could be one of the oldest stories from antiquity. It could be one of the oldest writings. And we see a fellow who doesn't seem to know anything about Moses, doesn't seem to know anything about a tabernacle or Mosaic worship, Mosaic sacrifice, Levitical priesthood, or anything like that. Instead, Job functions as the priest for his family, much the same way we see Abraham and Isaac and Jacob doing. And so Job fits probably into that time period right there in Genesis. We find out from Job chapter 1 that Job is richer than rich. Job has the kind of wealth that he today would be standing with Elon Musk, he today would be standing with Bill Gates, that kind of wealth. But it's in product, it's in cattle, and it's in sheep, and it's in camels, and it's in those kind of things. It's not in silver or gold, which again points to an ancient time period, not even Solomon. Remember, during the period of Solomon, he made gold as common as silver, and silver even less. We meet him, and he's filthy rich, and he's a good guy. He shuns evil, and he even says, maybe today one of my kids cursed God in his heart. And so he offers sacrifices for his kids, just in case. But now let's jump into Job chapter 1, but we'll begin in verses 6, and we'll go to verse 11. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And the Satan, and in the Hebrew it is the Satan, but in the Satan came also amongst them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" And then Satan answered the Lord and said, "From roaming about on the earth and walking around on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one like him on all the earth, a blameless and upright man, fearing God and turning away from evil." Then Satan answered the Lord, "Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now, put forth your hand and touch all that he has. He will surely curse you to his face, to your face. Have you ever heard of the phrase, the dog that bites the hand that feeds? I once had a roommate, and this roommate had a dog. This dog didn't know me, and so it was weary of me, and it would growl at me. How did I gain the dog's affections? I fed the dog. I gave the dog treats. I won the dog over to me. Satan goes before God in this episode, and God holds up Job and says, have you considered Job? I mean, he's a great guy. Look at him. And Satan points out, he's protected. He's got everything. And this is one of the problems with this kind of reading. You'll notice in your Bible that Job isn't at the beginning back with Genesis. In fact, Job is part of what we call the poetic books. You've got Job, and you've got Psalms, and you've got Proverbs, and so forth. And Satan says that you put a hedge around him. And you and I have to ask, was this some sort of literal, or is this some sort of metaphorical, some sort of other thing going on here? Whatever the case may be, Satan says to him, well, Job's no fool. Since you take care of him, since you provide for him, of course he behaves. But what if things were different? What if the cards were stacked against him? Would he still be as faithful? Would he still honor you in everything? Let's continue in the story, verses 12 through 19. Then the Lord said to Satan, behold, all that he has is in your power. Only do not put forth your hand on him. So Satan departed from the presence of the Lord. Now it happened on a day that Job's sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, that a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were feeding beside them, and the Sabeans attacked and took them. They also slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 bands and made raids on the camels. They took them and slew the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house. And behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they died. And I alone escaped to tell you. I want to draw your attention to my first point there in your bulletins. Point number 1. The author of our book, the inspired author, with the story that he is telling us from chapter 1, are the bad guys, or is Satan, or is God responsible for everything that just happened in chapter 1? This is one of those times that the answer is not immediately obvious. This is one of those things that you sometimes ask, you think about. And may I suggest, I don't think that Satan had to entice or force the Sabeans or the Chaldeans to do this. I think that they had always looked at Job's wealth and had always wanted to do this, and yet were prevented. But here an opportunity presented itself. And I don't think that they get to say, the devil made me do it. I think they always wanted to do it, and the opportunity presented itself, and they swooped in and took his wealth. Chapter 2 reads a great deal like chapter 1, and you'll forgive me, but we're just going to look at a section of this. Interestingly, with everything that just happened, all the wealth gone, the kids gone, and so forth, you'll remember that Job tears his clothes and he shaves his head, and that had nothing to do with me doing a haircut this week. I'm just going to let that roll a little bit further. He says, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I shall return. The Lord has given, the Lord has taken away. Now in chapter 2, we see something very similar to chapter 1. We see Satan, and he goes before God, and God kind of gloats a little bit over Satan. Did you see, even though I let you know, Job still stayed on the right path. He still, let's look at Satan's response. So this is Job chapter 2, verses 4 through 6. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin. All that a man has he will give for his life. However, put forth your hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. So the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. Now you will forgive me this morning. The book of Job is a rather long book, and we don't have time to go through the whole thing unless you want to be here till Christmas. But we are going to go through this, and just because I skip a passage doesn't mean next time you're reading through you go, oh, Ozzy skipped this passage, so I get to skip it from now. No, nothing like that. But let's stay on task here. Again, just like chapter 1, Satan has license. He has to go before God, and God gives him some license. But God still puts limits. Just like in chapter 1, God put a limit on Job. So here, God also puts a limit on him. And let's look at verse 7. Then Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. Ouch. This is no small detail for us when we look at this text and when we deal with everything going on in Job. Satan could afflict his body, but he couldn't kill him. And Satan had come up with the idea, if I could only get to him, okay, taking away his wealth and killing his kids, that didn't do it. But if I could get at him, then I could win this bet. That's an interesting way to look at chapter 1 and chapter 2, huh? That there's like some sort of cosmic bet going on in the heavenlies. But make sure you understand, this is Satan who does this to Job. It's not God who does this to Job. It's Satan who does this to Job. But after I graduated from high school, and before Christy graduated from high school, there was this story that happened at our high school, because we went to the same high school. And when I was in high school, I really got into cameras and video editing and all those kinds of things. And this will date me. This is back when you had a VHS camera, or a super VHS camera, right? And not everybody had those. Today we walk around with phones in our pockets that are barely phones. They're computers, and they're cameras, and they're everything else, and they're phones on top of that, right? But this is back when not everybody had a camera. And if you were in good standing in this class with the teacher, you could sign out a camera for the weekend to work on your projects, right? And somewhere between my graduation and Christy's graduation, somebody checked out a camera. And that night, Friday night, Saturday night, they went to a party. And they filmed the party, and this party was an underage drinking party. And they got on film, literally film, they got minors drinking alcohol. And whoever it was that checked out the camera, they forgot to take the tape when they turned the camera back in. So the tape was still in the camera when it got turned back in. Lo and behold, somebody finds the tape. They find what it is. It gets turned over as evidence. And everybody identified on the tape gets ticketed. Minors in possession, minors consuming alcohol. How popular was the person that left the film in the camera after that episode? I don't know who it is. Again, I had already left school by this point, but I seriously doubt they were very popular. But, honest question though, did they get in trouble because the film got left in the camera? Or did they get in trouble because they were drinking underage? They got in trouble because of what they did. They were responsible. They made the choice. I say as a high school student who made that very same choice but was smart enough not to film it. But they made the choice. They can blame that person that made the video. They can blame them and they can be angry at them. But in reality, they are the ones that drank. They are the ones that did that and then got in trouble for it. So any superficial blaming the one who made the video is just that. It's superficial and it's false. They got in trouble because of what they did. Point number 2 in your bulletin. It was not God who smote Job. The author tells us it was Satan. It was Satan who smote Job. How many of you like simple more than complex? I love simple. Simple is nice. Complex is hard. Complex has moving parts. Complex is the opposite of simple, right? The relationship between sin and suffering. It's not simple. It's really not. And I wish it were, but it's not. Because here's the idea. The idea is you sin, therefore you suffer for your sin. That would be a very easy, very noticeable, and so forth. But let me give you an example. Marriage and family and husband and wife and kids and good and wonderful and part of God's design, and then let's sprinkle some adultery into that. And it blows up, right? And divorce and separated houses and custody hearings and visitations and dividing of property and all of this stuff. But here's the thing. Not everybody who suffers is the one who sinned. You can suffer because of somebody else's sin. You have suffered because of somebody else's sin. We could go on and on and on, example after example, where just because you are suffering doesn't mean you're the one that sinned. You follow? And then let's look at the Bible, of course, and you'll remember Joseph. And Joseph, yeah, maybe he's a little bit of a rub my dreams in my brother's faces. But once he's sold into slavery and once he gets to Egypt and he gets sold into Potiphar's house and he stands on his morals, you remember this? Potiphar's wife wants to adultery with him and he stands on his morals and says no. And for standing on his morals, for not sinning, he gets thrown into prison. Micaiah is one of my favorite prophets, and you go, I don't remember the book of Micaiah. He didn't write a book. This is 1 Kings chapter 22. This is Ahaz and Jehoshaphat, and Ahaz wants to reconquer territory, and he needs Jehoshaphat's help, and they call Micaiah out of prison, and because Micaiah speaks the word of God, because he won't just tickle itching ears, because he won't just give the king the prophecy he wants, because he speaks the word of God, he's thrown back into prison. Paul, need I say more? Paul, for the crime of spreading the gospel, prison. So it's not cut and dry. It's not simple, you sin, therefore you suffer. You suffering, therefore you sinned. You'll remember Jesus is walking with the disciples. They see the blind man. And the disciples got it figured out. And they say to Jesus, who sinned? The parents or the kid? And Jesus blows their mind with neither. But that the glory of the Lord might be seen in this. After chapter 3, we see Job's friends come. And Job's friends are well aware of Job's circumstances, the calamities that he's facing. And Job's friends have simple theology. You are suffering because you sinned, And because your suffering is this, not this, but this, your sin must be this. So confess. What's your deep sins, Job? Because God doesn't just pick on people. You must be the worst sinner for everything you are suffering. It's far more complicated than that. But now, I wish again I could tell you it's very simple. So any chapter where it's the friends speaking, you can just write off everything they say because they've just got bad theology. And every chapter where Job is speaking, since Job is the hero of the book, everything is good. But again, it's not that simple. Because Job is actually only quoted one time in the whole New Testament. Although there's references to Job in the New Testament, it's only ever quoted one time. It's quoted by Paul in 1 Corinthians. And he quotes 1 Corinthians chapter 3. He quotes Job chapter 5, which is Eliphaz, one of Job's friends. So it's not wholesale. You get to throw out everything the friends say because Paul found truth in something Eliphaz said. And in fact, sometimes they make broad assuming truths, which are truths. But also Job, although back in chapter 1, after his kids are killed and his wealth is taken away and he tears his shirt and he shaves his head and blessed be the name of the Lord. And the author draws our attention to in all of this, Job did not sin or blame God. As the story progresses, though, you see Job starting to blame God. Job is a powerful book for me. Back in 2014, as I was doing my usual Bible reading and just reading through the Bible, and I had already read the book of Job, I don't know how many times, but this particular day in 2014, I was reading the book of Job, and I was reading this chapter, and I'm going to read what Job says. And then I'm going to read this note that has been in my Bible since 2014. Because something Job said on that day spoke to me in such a way that I had to write something down. Chapter 23 begins with Job, and he's talking about if only God were at the courthouse. And I could go to the courthouse. And I could lay out my case before God. And I could hear God's words. And I could learn God's arguments. If that were the case, I could literally go before God. Then God would see I'm innocent. And He would vindicate me. Let's look at Job chapter 23, verses 8 through 14. Listen to Job. Behold, I go forward, but He, God, is not there. And backward, but I cannot perceive Him, God. When He acts on the left, I cannot behold Him. He turns to the right, I cannot see Him. But He knows the way I take. When He has tried me, I shall come forth as gold. My foot has held to His path. I have kept His ways and not turned aside. I have not departed from the commands of His lips. I have treasured the word of His mouth more than my necessary food. But He is unique, and who can turn Him? And what His soul does, He desires, He does. For He performs what is appointed for me, and many such decrees are with Him. This morning, somebody asked me one of those good, deep questions. He asked, how do you know that God called you to ministry? How do you know the calling of God? Great question. Job reveals a deep, profound truth right here in 23. Hold on to this, know this. Sometimes you can feel that leading of the Holy Spirit. Do you know what I'm talking about? Have you had that? Where you just have this feeling that the Lord is leading you a particular way. Sometimes you catch a glimmer, you catch a little glimpse of God and what He's doing. But here is such an important thing that Job illustrates for us. we really don't know what God is doing. If God is working in front of us, we might not catch him. If God is working behind us, and even if we turn at the right moment, we won't see him.
So during the message yesterday, I forgot to get back to reading the note that I wrote, so I'm editing it in at this spot. I wrote this note on March 13th, 2014, after reading Job 23. I wrote, I applied for several new jobs. Christy didn't get the job in Redmond. We don't know if we can get pregnant. The church offering has been down all of 2014. We don't know what tomorrow will bring. Every morning, Christy and I take time to pray together. I've been steadfast that God has a plan. I wish I knew what it was, but God has a plan.
James says something very profound to this. In quoting, in fact, from the poetic section, James in our New Testament quotes from Proverbs 27, and he alludes to Job chapter 7, but he says, when you go into town and you say, we will do this or we will do that and we will carry on a profit, he says, you don't even know what a day may bring. You are but a vapor. Instead, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will do this or we will do that. This brings me to point number 3 on your bulletin there. Job is a complicated character, but so are all people of faith. You can't put Job into one category because in chapter 1 and in chapter 2, he is a man standing on his faith. But as the story progresses, there are chapters where he is blaming God. He is saying, God is a bully. He has set me up as a target and he's just shooting arrows at me because he's a mean guy. So again, Job is a complicated character, and I bet that every one of you is also a complicated character. And I've already shared with you that I'm a complicated character because I told you back when I was in high school I was an atheist, and now suddenly I'm here preaching in front of you and you go, something happened. Something happened between point A and point B. Job's friends are of little to no help, and then there's this other character introduced later in the book. His name is Elihu. And Elihu, he says some really good truths, but he says so without any tact. He's actually presented as younger than everybody else. He says, these were older and I let them speak first because wisdom should speak. But here, I'm going to tell you the truth, Job. And he just does that blanket, naked truth that you don't really want to hear because you want things with tact, right? And even that, Job doesn't accept. Even that, Job is not happy with. In chapter 38, God comes before Job in a whirlwind, and we get this final climax. Now, we're not going to read everything about it. God comes before him and God starts answering it, asking him a whole bunch of questions. Let's jump into chapter 40, and we'll do chapter 40 verses 1 through 14. Then the Lord said to Job, will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and says, behold, I am insignificant. And what can I reply to you? I lay my hand upon my mouth. Once I have spoken, I will not answer. Even twice, I will not add more. Verse 6. Then the Lord answered Job out of the storm and said, now gird up your loins like a man, and I will ask you, and you will instruct me. Will you really annul my judgments? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Or do you have an arm like God? Can you thunder with a voice like his? Adore yourself with eminence and dignity, and clothe yourself with honor and majesty. Pour out the overflowing of your anger, and look upon everyone who is proud, and make him low. Look upon everybody who is proud and humble him, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together and bind them in the hidden places. Then verse 14. Then I will also confess to you that your own right hand can save you. God asks Job a whole bunch of questions, and if you've ever read the questions he asks, some of them are about nature, some of them we would call them physics questions today. He asks all these questions saying, Job, if you're going to come before me, you better be able to answer all of these kinds of questions. And here, God asks Job a very important question. Can the fault finder really condemn me? And Job has a momentary lapse and says, "Nope, I'm done. I'm sorry. I'm not who I thought I was. I'll be quiet." But God doesn't let him off, and God continues this, and God asks him all these questions. And you might think that the only purpose is for God to boast. You might think that all God is doing is boasting. But he's actually getting Job somewhere that Job needs to be, somewhere that you and I need to be. Let's jump into chapter 42 and let's read Job's response after all that God has said. 42 verse 1. Then Job answered the Lord and said, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is it that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I declared that which I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I do not know. Hear now, and I will speak, and I will ask you, and you instruct me. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now I see you. Therefore I retract, and I repent in dust and ashes. There was this movie several years ago, and the movie is actually more than 20 years old, and a great big spoiler alert would be in effect, but if you haven't seen the movie in 20 years, I really don't feel bad ruining the movie for you now. But the movie is called Sliding Door. And in Sliding Door, there is our main character. And at one scene, our main character is running for a subway, running to make it before the doors slide shut. And at that moment, the film splits into two storylines. And one storyline, she makes the train, and the other storyline, she misses the train. And from then on, you're basically watching two different movies with the same character. One where she made this train, and one where she didn't make this train. And in one, she dyes her hair, which makes it so much easier to keep track which storyline are we on. But it goes in such a fashion in this. There's this great big twist on the storyline where she makes the train on time. Her life is relatively easy going forward, but she dies unexpectedly. But when she misses the train, this leads to a life full of trial and struggle and hardship. And she comes out the other end the better for it all. And this movie touches a very deep truth. Not that every trial and struggle and so forth you go through, you'll eventually find that every cloud has a silver lining, because that's not the answer. But instead, you find that in suffering, we're sometimes the better, but this all comes about because she missed the train or she made the train. But before that moment, she didn't know what was going to happen. You and I don't have the ability. We don't know what tomorrow brings. And we don't know if what seems like a mundane, everyday occurrence, if it happens this way, it could project us on a course we could have never predicted. But if it happens that way, it could project us on a course that we could never predict. That's so important for us as humans to grasp. That's so important for us to recognize our limits. When you think about this, God asking Job this series of questions, yes, it was to invoke awe. It was to show how big God is, but it was also to get him to trust. If God is that big, then He has it in hand. And if He has it in hand, then He has you in hand.